The night I met Jessica Wilson, she said I saved her life. Dramatic, sure, but when you're standing in a Target parking lot at 11:42 p.m. because some stranger's car won't start, drama's baked into the situation. Her mascara was smudged, she looked exhausted, and her voice cracked just enough to feel real when she said, "I'm sorry, I'm just not having a great year." I was parked 2 rows over, picking up printer ink and granola bars when I saw her trying to wave down a rideshare that never came. I offered a jump. She smiled like I'd just thrown her a life raft in a storm. That's how it started. Jake Reynolds, 29 years old. IT systems analyst, debt-free, good credit, soft spot for broken things. Including people. Jessica was 26. Substitute teacher, part-time waitress, full-time chaos. I didn't know that last part yet, of course. Back then, all I saw was a girl who couldn't catch a break. She told me her last boyfriend left her with maxed-out cards and a mountain of unpaid bills. She was couch surfing, driving a car that coughed every time it turned left, and living on $2 tacos and coffee shop Wi-Fi. "Why would you even help someone like me?" she asked one night, curled up on my couch, wearing my hoodie like she'd always belonged there. "Because someone should," I said. And I meant it. First, I helped her budget. Then I paid off $4,000 of debt she said was crushing her. Got her a secured credit card. Eventually, I signed for a new car, $24,000 off the lot, blue Civic, clean title. Registered in my name. She cried when I handed her the keys. "No one's ever believed in me like you do." Funny thing about being the guy who rescues people, you never stop to ask why they needed saving in the first place. They say hindsight's 20/20ths. But in my case, it had neon lights and a megaphone. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It's not like one day she was clinging to me for support and the next she was brushing me off for better company. No, Jessica was smarter than that. Her change came in increments like a software update that installs quietly while you sleep. It started with little things. Texts she wouldn't answer. Nights she'd stay late at her part-time tutoring job even though the place closed at 6. She got a new wardrobe, sleek, expensive stuff I hadn't seen in her closet before. Said she wanted to feel like a real adult. Fair enough. But then Ryan, my coworker and one of the few people with a decent radar for BS, pulled me aside in the break room one morning. "Hey man, you still seeing that girl, Jessica?" "Yeah." "Why?" He hesitated. "Pretty sure I saw her last weekend at the open house Brian Thompson was running." "You know him?" "Yeah." I knew Brian. High-end real estate guy. White teeth, slick suit, always on Bluetooth. The kind of guy who calls himself a closer, unironically. "She was all over him," Ryan added, looking uncomfortable. "Could be nothing. Just thought you should know." I nodded and thanked him. Told him it was probably a misunderstanding. It wasn't. 2 days later, I walked into the living room and saw Jessica on the phone. She didn't hear me come in. Her voice was soft, giggly. Flirty. "You're just different," she was saying. "You get it, you know?" Then silence. She must have been listening. I backed out quietly. Said nothing. Instead, I planned a weekend trip to Asheville. Rented a cabin. Said I needed some time with her, just us. I needed to know if the person I'd fallen for still existed. If this was still real, or if I'd just been financing someone's exit plan. She agreed to go. Smiled like nothing was wrong. But something was. And I wasn't imagining it anymore. I wish I could tell you that the weekend cleared things up. That it was romantic, restorative, some Hallmark healing trip. It wasn't. The cabin was beautiful, mountains in the distance, a fire pit, even one of those little hot tubs with the LED lights. But Jessica was somewhere else. Not physically, she was right there beside me, flipping through Instagram and sipping wine, but mentally? Gone. I tried. God, I tried. Cooked dinner, lit candles, brought out that board game she used to love. She smiled, said all the right things, but it was like dating a voice memo. No spark. No soul behind the eyes. Just polite participation. Sunday morning, I watched her scroll through her phone before she even said good morning. That's when I asked, "Jess, is there someone else?" She didn't even flinch. Just looked up slowly and said, "Yeah. I've been seeing Brian." Silence. She didn't cry. Didn't apologize. Just waited like I was supposed to thank her for the honesty. "He's just more aligned with where I'm going," she added. "I mean, you've helped me so much, Jake. And I'll always appreciate that. But we're just different levels now." "Different levels?" I nodded once, stood up, and packed my bag. No yelling. No accusations. Just clarity. Cold, sharp clarity. On the drive home, I made 3 quiet moves. First, I called the dealership. The Civic's title was in my name. Scheduled a pickup for Tuesday. Second, I logged into the credit card I'd opened for her. Suspended it immediately. Third, I called my landlord and asked about removing someone from the lease. By the time she got home Tuesday night, the car was gone, her cards were declined, and her key no longer worked in the front door. I left her a note. No hard feelings. I'm just operating on my level now. Jessica called me 6 times that night. I didn't answer. Her voicemails started calm, confused, almost sweet. Hey, I think there's a mistake with the apartment key and the car. Can you call me back? By message 4, the sweetness had curdled. You can't just take things from people, Jake. That's controlling. That's cruel. Cruel? Funny word coming from someone who called me a stepping stone with Wi-Fi. She showed up the next day, pounding on my apartment door like she still lived there. When I opened it, she launched into a speech about dignity, about how adults don't treat each other like this. I let her finish. Then I handed her a manila envelope removal notice from the lease, plus documentation for the car and the now-defunct credit line. Every receipt. Every transaction. Legal, clean, silent. You always liked paper trails, I said. So I left one. She stared at me like she couldn't decide whether to slap me or beg. In the end, she just turned and walked away. But Jessica wasn't done. By the weekend, I started hearing things. A few of our mutual friends, mostly from her circle, were reaching out. Jake, what's going on? Jess says you freaked out. That you locked her out canceled everything. She said you were obsessive. Of course she did. But then came Megan. She and Jessica had been close, brunch close, not secrets close. Megan messaged me out of the blue. Hey, she wrote. I think you should see this. She sent screenshots. Conversations between her and Jessica, laughing about financial upgrades, bragging about leveling up with Brian, mocking me for being predictable. There it was. The truth in bold font and emojis. Megan ended her message with, you didn't deserve that. Just so you know. That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with heartbreak. I was dealing with a con. 2 weeks passed. The smoke cleared. Jessica stopped calling. Her friends stopped defending her once Megan's messages made the rounds. Turns out, once you pull back the curtain, it's hard to root for the wizard. I figured it was over. Lesson learned, dignity intact. But then I checked my bank account. I wasn't paranoid. I was just moving money around, had some savings I was planning to put into a Roth IRA. That's when I saw it, $8,000 gone. Not spent. Transferred. Quietly. Over 2 days. Disguised as bill pay withdrawals. Except I hadn't paid any bills. I called the bank. The first rep sounded half asleep until I mentioned possible fraud. Then it turned serious. They ran the logs. Told me the money was transferred from my account using a signed authorization form from a physical branch. But I hadn't been in any branch. They pulled up security footage. It was Jessica. She walked in with a copy of my ID, an old scan I'd sent her when she needed help booking a rental car. She wore a blazer and glasses. Professional. Harmless. Walked out 8 minutes later, lighter by $8,000. The rep put me on hold. When he came back, his voice had changed. We'll be forwarding this to our fraud department immediately, Mr. Reynolds. You'll also want to file a police report. I did. By the end of the week, detectives were involved. They called it forgery, identity theft, theft over $5,000, all neat little labels for what felt like a knife between the ribs. But the kicker? During the search of her parents' house, where she'd moved after being evicted, they found a notebook. Not just a journal. A logbook. Inside were names, passwords, notes, dates. Little color-coded tabs labeled things like car timeline and exit strategy. I wasn't the first. And I wasn't supposed to be the last. Detective Harris was the kind of guy who didn't waste words. Thick glasses, permanent coffee stain on his tie, a voice like he'd seen it all twice and was unimpressed both times. He called me in the next morning. Mr. Reynolds, we need you to come down and take a look at something. When I got there, he handed me a pair of gloves and pointed to a plain spiral-bound notebook on the table. This was found during the search. Belongs to Ms. Wilson. Might be useful for your case. Useful was one word for it. It was chilling. Each section was labeled with a name. Mark. Darren. Jake. My name. Full-page spread. Dates, details, dollar amounts, even a checklist. Get him to co-sign white heavy check mark. Emotional bonding phase white heavy check mark. Escalate helpless stories white heavy check mark. Introduce trust exercises white heavy check mark. Secure large financial support white heavy check mark. Begin distancing phase white heavy check mark. Exit with sympathy narrative white large square. I stared at the page like it might rewrite itself. It didn't. She's done this before? I asked quietly. At least 3 times that we know of, Harris replied. What you saw as manipulation we're classifying as fraud with intent. And the forgery, that's serious. I nodded slowly, fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Brian Thompson? I asked. The guy she left me for? Harris flipped through the next section. Yep, he's in here too. New target. She'd already drafted a fake invoice template in his name. Looks like she was setting him up for some kind of investment scheme. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. This was about justice. And I wasn't going to yell or cry or throw stones. I was going to make sure she faced exactly what she thought she was too smart to ever deal with. Consequences. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning. Jessica had just stepped out of a yoga class, hair up, Starbucks in hand, like nothing in the world could touch her. That's when 2 plainclothes officers approached, said her name, and read her the charges. Forgery, identity theft, financial fraud, grand larceny. All neat and tidy. They found the logbook, the forged forms, bank footage, even a flash drive she didn't think to wipe, full of PDFs, falsified receipts, and a Word doc titled Backup Plans. Turns out the exit strategy she never checked off in my chapter? It got checked by the state instead. She pled guilty. Her attorney spun the usual story: emotional trauma, ex-boyfriend manipulation, temporary lapse in judgment. But it didn't fly. Not when the prosecution laid out her patterns. Not when other names came forward, backed by receipts, chats, and bank statements. 18 months in prison, plus restitution to the victims, including me. I remember sitting in the courtroom watching her as the sentence was read. She didn't cry, didn't plead, just stared forward, frozen in the spotlight she used to manipulate her way into people's lives. Afterward, people asked if I felt vindicated. I didn't. I felt done. The truth wasn't a hammer. It was a release. No more wondering if I missed a sign. No more questioning whether I overreacted. The whole thing had been a performance and I'd simply stopped clapping. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than I'd felt in months. Not because I got revenge, but because I'd taken my power back without ever raising my voice. And she? She finally faced something she couldn't finesse her way out of. The money came back slowly. First, the $8,000 reimbursed through the bank's fraud department once the case wrapped. Then the car sold back to the dealership for a decent chunk of change. Not quite what I paid, but enough. The lease? Already cleared. The credit card she maxed out? Paid off and closed. Every tether snipped? I didn't celebrate. No champagne, no vindication playlist. Just checked the boxes one by one. Restored balance. Quietly. A month later, my boss called me into his office. Said he'd watched how I handled everything, the calm, the discipline, the refusal to let emotion wreck my focus. We're expanding to Tokyo, he said. You've been consistent. Strategic. You'd be a strong lead on that team. I accepted without hesitation. The move wasn't about running away. It was about realignment. A chance to put ocean and purpose between myself and the wreckage. I boxed up my apartment, sold what I didn't need, and booked a one-way flight. Japan felt like the opposite of her, deliberate, serene, structured. Every morning I walked the streets of Shibuya with my coffee head clear. Learned how to slow down. How to rebuild not with fire or anger, but with presence. I started journaling. Reading again. Breathing like someone who hadn't been holding it for years. And then, out of nowhere, Sophia. Met her at a bookstore of all places. American expat, sharp-eyed, dry-humored. Nothing flashy. No tragic backstory. Just a woman who listened more than she spoke and didn't ask about credit scores on the second date. Still, trust came slow. I didn't offer up my past like some wounded trophy. But when I finally did, she didn't blink. She just said, "You're not broken. You're just done letting people write your story for you." Sophia didn't need saving. She had her own apartment, ran her own consulting gig, and filed her own taxes early. She didn't play damsel. She didn't cry on cue. She didn't make me feel like I had to earn her trust through acts of financial heroism. And that threw me. Because for a long time, I thought that's what love looked like, rescuing someone. Throwing them a rope and calling it connection. But Sophia didn't need a rope. She needed a partner. And at first, I wasn't sure I remembered how to be one. We took things slow. No grand gestures. No fast-forwarding through intimacy with gifts or solutions. Just conversations. Books traded. Long walks around quiet Tokyo neighborhoods. Sunday ramen shops. I didn't tell her how much I made. She never asked. One night, over a bowl of miso soup, she said, "You always pause before you share something personal. Like you're measuring the cost." I smiled. I used to give too much away. Now I'm trying to be sure what's worth offering. She nodded. Didn't push. That was the thing about her, she never needed to win. She just waited until I came forward on my own. I told her everything about Jessica. About the money, the manipulation, the notebook full of schemes. She didn't interrupt, didn't flinch. When I finished, she leaned back and said, she built a house on your foundation, then blamed you for the design. But you're not the blueprint. You're the builder. That stuck with me. Because I'd spent so long thinking maybe I was the flaw. That if I'd just said no sooner or seen clearer, I could have avoided the wreck. But the truth? Some people aren't looking for love. They're looking for leverage. There's a misconception about people like me. Quiet. Steady. Low-key. Folks think we're soft. Like we won't notice the knife if it slides in slow enough. Like we'll just absorb the damage and move on with a polite nod and a bruised smile. But here's what they forget. Still waters don't mean there's no current. Sometimes it just means you're too far upstream to see the storm coming. When Jessica walked out, she thought she was winning. Thought I'd sulk, maybe beg, maybe spin in circles trying to win her back. That's the story she sold to her friends, that I was controlling, obsessive, that I couldn't handle her evolving. But what she didn't realize was that she had played a game with someone who wasn't interested in revenge. Just closure. That's why it worked. Because I didn't scream. I didn't text angry paragraphs or show up at her job or blast our story online. I just walked. Silently. Surgically. I took back the car because I owned it. I froze the accounts because I opened them. I evicted her because I paid the rent. She called it cruelty. I called it reversal. See, I never took anything from her. I just retrieved what was mine. And I did it without a word because silence, wielded right, is sharper than any speech. You want to know what really broke her? It wasn't the court case. Wasn't the jail time. Wasn't even her parents finding out who she really was. It was losing control of the story. She wanted to be the wounded girl saved by a fool. But the fool left receipts. And now the only narrative left was the truth. It started as a trickle. After the trial, one of Jessica's former roommates reached out, someone I'd never met, a girl named Erica. Said she saw the story online. Said she'd lived with Jessica for 6 months back in Durham. Said she lost $2,000 when Jessica borrowed her card for emergency groceries. Then came Todd. Said he dated Jessica back in community college. Helped her get out of a bad lease. Co-signed a loan he never saw again. Got ghosted a week after. Each one had a different name for it: manipulation, abuse, theft. But all the stories had the same spine. Charm. Crisis. Rescue. Withdrawal. Exit. It was like reading versions of my own story, just with different backdrops. Different brands of kindness, all exploited the same way. And you know what shocked me most? Not how similar we were, but how none of us had ever spoken up. Not really. Because you don't expect to be conned by affection. You don't assume love is a Trojan horse. And when it all falls apart, you're not just embarrassed, you feel complicit. Like somehow you invited it. But here's the truth no one wants to admit. Predators don't need claws when you hand them the keys. Jessica's real crime wasn't that she lied. It's that she studied people until she knew exactly how to dress the lie up in just enough pain and gratitude to pass it off as sincerity. But the performance is over now. The curtain's down. And her cast of fools finally has a voice. The damage we took in silence? We're answering it now with receipts, with records, with our names. Not for vengeance. For truth. They say jail changes people. Sometimes it does. Other times it just gives them new material. Jessica served 11 months before they let her out on parole. Early release for good behavior, whatever that means. I didn't mark the date, didn't think about it much until I got a text from Megan. You'll never believe who tried to message me. Attached was a screenshot, Jessica reaching out like nothing had happened. Hey, hope you're doing well. I've been reflecting a lot lately. I know things got complicated, but I miss our talks. Would love to reconnect. Reflecting. That's how she framed fraud, theft, and manipulation. As if she'd accidentally spilled wine on someone's rug instead of flipping lives upside down like she was flipping houses. Megan didn't respond. Neither did Brian, apparently. Heard through the grapevine he's moved cities. Got married. Different league entirely now. Jessica, from what I gather, is trying to start a blog. Healing from toxic love. You really can't make this stuff up. She's rebranding her crimes into content. Victim turned influencer. The cycle mutates. But what struck me wasn't that she reached out. It was who she didn't. Me. Not one message. Not one apology. Not even a fake one. Because she knows. She knows I saw everything. The truth behind the tears. The notebook. The pattern. And worst of all, she knows I didn't break. Because that's what she counts on, not just trust, but damage. She needs to leave people too ashamed to speak, too gutted to fight back. But I didn't burn. I recalibrated. She can spin her story however she likes. Call it healing. Call it growth. Call it whatever new age brand gets her the most sympathy clicks. But underneath it, she knows the truth. The one person she couldn't erase or rewrite was the one who never tried to hurt her. I used to replay conversations in my head. The good ones, the bad ones, the ones where I should have said more. Or said less. The imaginary do-overs, the perfect lines delivered too late. But after Jessica, that habit died. There was no speech I could give that would fix it. And more importantly, I didn't need one. Sometimes you win by not answering the door. Sophia and I moved in together last spring. Nothing flashy. A modest place, clean lines, lots of light. No ghosts in the walls. Just two people building something in real time, no debt, no secrets, no twisted power balances. I still flinch when someone says, "You're such a good guy." That label used to feel like a compliment. Now it just sounds like a neon sign over my head, easy to manipulate. But Sophia doesn't say that. She just listens. Notices. Checks in. Calls me out too gently but clearly when I retreat behind silence like it's armor. "You don't have to prove anything anymore," she told me once. Not to me. Not to anyone. And that's the thing I didn't understand back when Jessica was crying on my couch and calling me her savior. Love isn't about proving your worth. It's about being seen without having to audition. I still have the notebook, by the way. I don't open it. Don't need to. But I kept it. Not as a souvenir. Not as bitterness in a drawer. As proof that even the quiet guy, the one who used to second-guess himself to death, can look the storm dead in the eye and survive. It was a Thursday morning, quiet, overcast, when I finally emptied the last drawer labeled her. Old photos. Expired insurance cards. A shoebox with receipts I no longer needed from a life I no longer lived. I tossed most of it. Kept one thing. A note Jessica wrote me the day I gave her the car. It was folded inside a thank you card covered in glitter she probably thought made it sweet. The message? "You didn't just give me a second chance, you made me believe in people again." I remember reading that the first time, heart pounding like I'd just saved someone from drowning. Yeah? I read it and felt nothing. No sting. No ache. Just perspective. She didn't believe in people. She believed in leverage. But I didn't burn her world down. Didn't throw her into the storm. I simply let the storm come quietly, steadily, by doing what she never thought I'd do. Hold the line. Not for revenge. Not for pride. For myself. I stopped overgiving. I stopped auditioning. I stopped believing that love meant funding someone's recovery project. And in the space that silence left behind, I found something better. A clean slate. The kind no one can take from you. The kind you build brick by brick with someone who doesn't need to be impressed, just met honestly. Jessica taught me something, even if she didn't mean to. That the loudest power move isn't revenge. It's walking away while the other person's still rehearsing their next lie. Last fall, I took Sophia to the mountains. No big agenda. Just us, a cabin, and a sky that didn't ask anything from you but presence. One morning, we sat on the porch watching the fog roll off the trees. She sipped her coffee, pulled her knees up to her chest, and asked me something simple. "If you could go back, would you still help her?" I didn't answer right away, because part of me wanted to say no. That I'd keep the money, the time, the trust. That I'd spot the con and cut it off at the first smile. But that'd be a lie. Because the truth is, I wouldn't change a thing. Not because she deserved it, but because I did. I needed to know how far I was willing to go for someone I believed in. I needed to learn that my kindness wasn't the problem, my boundaries were. And I needed to lose something real to build something better. That doesn't make her right. It makes me forged. You don't walk through betrayal and come out the same. You come out sharper, quieter, more precise. You stop handing out pieces of yourself like samples at a grocery store. You start asking who deserves the full version of you. And if you're lucky, really lucky, you meet someone who doesn't ask you to save them. They just meet you where you are. I slid my hand into Sophia's and finally answered, yeah. I'd still help her. But the second she reached for control, I'd walk away sooner. She smiled. That's not regret. That's wisdom. Call it what you want. I call it peace. Because in the end, this story wasn't about what I lost. It's about what I refused to let her keep.